And now, a board game review from me, Joe Sallen.
You're watching the Sallen Coefficient, a new and nuanced approach to board game reviewing by a core gamer for core gamers. Ever wondered what they mean when they say fun, or good, or bad, or awesome? At the Sallen Coefficient, I will tell you more to help you make up your mind about whether or not a game is worth your time.
Sponsored by Game Surplus, bringing the world of board games to you at GameSurplus.com.
I'm a monster rights advocate, and unfortunately I have some qualms, and so does my movement, about the depiction of monster-dwarf relations in Dwarves Winter. Winter's a hard time for all of us, and well, we all know what it's like to do things that we later on regret, but if you do them in the name of feeding your family,
Hi folks, and welcome to the Sallen Coefficient, a video review series in which I, Joe Sallen, help you to decide whether or not a game is worth your time. Today, the game in question is Dwarves Winter. This is with a 7 instead of a V or E in Dwarves, and it is designed by Louis Bruy, and it is also artwork done by him as well. So designer and artist, the same person here. And the game of Dwarves Winter is actually not the first in its series. There was a previous game called Dwarves Fall. These have run on successful Kickstarters. The artwork is very adorable. Luis has experience as a children's magazine artist, and it really comes across in his whimsical drawings, and it helps to be an inviting way to get younger and less gamey gamers into the hobby. But let me tell you about how Dwarves Winter measures up for an analytical core gamer as myself. I'm going to be telling you my personal feelings, and before that I will tell you the Sallen Coefficient, which is kind of the more analytical side of my brain that tries to search for the objective pieces in a game that I can tell you for certain that will communicate, hopefully from my experience, to you. And I know that's for certain, hopefully, it's because there is no true objectivity in in any sort of criticism or any sort of art. But what I'm looking to do here is tell you how solid and how sound the game is with the Sallen Coefficient, and then tell you my own personal rating and show you how that contrasts and tell you why.
stereotypical depiction of monsters in the media. We're all shown to be baddies, to be boogeymen.
So, Dwarves Winter is going to see players in the role of the dwarf chieftains that each have a troop of 7 dwarves that they are going to be placing out on a castle board that is composed of different areas with a castle at its center. These areas each have a different resource that they produce. Not all of them are different, but there's different resources produced on these different areas. And then monsters will spawn on the outskirts of the castle and march their way in towards the castle. If a monster ever ends the round on the castle, all players lose. At the same time, players are fighting against disasters, and these disasters require players to deal with them, and if there's too many disasters left at the end of a round, all players will lose as well. So the way that you actually fight these monsters and deal with these disasters is by producing in the land itself. And the production is largely tied to a card-playing system by which one player will choose a certain suit of cards. There's 4 different musical instruments that are each kind of like a suit that you're saying, I'm going to play this music, and then all other players, after you are done, get a chance to play any cards that are in their hand, which is also limited usually to 7 cards, can then play them. So it's got this card playing system by which you can only play one type of music per round, and you can only play cards of that type of music, and then you have to wait for other players to play music before you get your other cards played. But basically, you're going to start the game with this set of 7 cards that's identical to all other players, but you'll be adding new cards to them, which are going to be new dwarves that will have their own music that they fit into and have maybe better abilities, and you'll have to be judicious in when you're selecting the crew of dwarves you want to keep with you for every round, because whenever you've left a dwarf at home, then somebody will activate that music and you don't get to get that resource or move your dwarves around on the board, or the other main actions, producing and stuff. And that's really, for the most part, like, this is a very simple sort of placing it's about how efficiently can you get your guys from your personal board onto the main board. And there's one major limitation to that, which is that when you're moving around your pieces, you absolutely have to spawn in different locations. So if you're placing your guys out on the board, you have to spawn them in different locations in a certain round. You can't just like dump a whole bunch of guys on one spot. You have to spawn them in different locations and then use extra actions to move them to where they need to go. You're also going to be dealing with negative effects as a result of these monsters. Monsters and disasters will cease production in an area, so you can't get the resources that you need to actually defeat those monsters. And they will also do things like rob you of actions every round, or limit your hand size, or even other types of like eating your dwarves that are on the board that can happen.
My first inspiration, which was Sully in Monsters Inc., he really humanized the monster in all of us.
The actual core gameplay involves a fairly well-programmed monster movement, which is then going to be followed by each player choosing actions. And you get like 5 actions on your turn, and this is one of my main criticisms, that you have 5 actions and you have to like kind of keep them all in your head. You're like, okay, well, for my first
action I did this, and my second action I did this. Oh, and I did not. Okay, and now I get a free action because I can beat this monster. Beating monsters, beating disasters is always a free action. So that didn't cost me an action, but it moved a lot of my pieces. And I don't really remember if I had spawned in this area in the board or not earlier. So 5 actions is quite a bit, and you have to do these all at the same time. And then usually you will be playing a type of music on your round, and that will involve you playing then several actions out of your hand, then waiting for the entire round to get around with other players playing their actions, and you have to come back and remember exactly how many actions you had to be able to keep moving. So
it's a bit to keep in your head, but I think the investment is really worth it here, because this is something that is really inviting and very intuitive. It's the the tower defense, sort of like, how are we going to keep these monsters at bay? And it really does have a frantic tension to it, because all players can lose together. And that actually is how 2 of my 4 games that I've tried so far of this have gone. The only games that have gone to the very end were ones in which players all decided as a group that they were going to make sure that didn't happen. In any other game where we didn't have any sort of a pact going into it, one player felt like they were behind, or just the actual challenges we had to defeat were just so much that we looked at our hand and looked at all of our options. We're like, well, I can't get enough stuff to do this, so there's no way that I can actually keep this monster from destroying the castle, so do you guys just want to pack it up? So it is a tough game that feels like a cooperative game in many aspects. If you are not keeping other players at the table happy by playing the right type of music so that their turns don't get ruined, players can just kind of turn that switch and be like, okay, well, I'm not going to kill this monster. And I would say that is most common in these types of semi-cooperative games where players can all win or all lose together, or only one player wins. Because if you're going to lose, and you can kind of track that like you're a little bit stunted in your economic engine or your growth, or that something happened that really kind of set you back, you can just kind of not play, and then in a way that will tank the game for all the other players. I think this is less common at a higher player count. I'd say that the higher player count, you would expect it to be more common because there's more players that are going to be able to potentially notice. But I'd say that it's less common because they actually make the game slightly easier for a 4-player game. You don't have to fight quite as many monsters, and the monsters really are what can get away from you. So in general, like, the semi-cooperative nature of this game is really unique. It's led to me kind of framing the game for the minds of the players that are going to be playing the game, that, hey, I know that we're used to playing competitive Euro games where if I can somehow play a type of music and nobody else benefits from it, that's good because I want to win. I only win alone. But if you do that in this game, you're going to have other players that can't fight threats that need to be fought, or the game will end and everybody loses. So you need to be in a different frame of mind. You need to be like, okay, hold on. Well, I could play this type of music or this type of music. Which one specifically? Is there anybody who needs me to play this type of music? You can use diplomacy in this game to make sure it doesn't come to that loss. And at 2 and 3 players, I would say that the cooperation between players is much more important than at the 4-player. I actually would recommend playing this 4-player game with the Nightmare variant, where you have to defeat extra disasters, just because the game being a little bit easier can sometimes result in a late game, last round drying up of possibilities. The actual way that you're going to score points in this game is mainly through defeating the monsters and dealing with the disasters. You also get some points by drafting the new cards to your hand. The workers that you hire are going to give you more points. You start with a whole bunch of 0 value guys, but then you can hire better ones. Anyway, that's like all the points in the game. So you definitely do want to be dealing with all the monsters that you can and dealing with all the disasters that you can. But if you let a player who's playing with you get too far behind, they can just kind of give up, move all their guys and not take anything, and then kind of just lose the game almost intentionally. And I've seen that happen, like I said, in 2 different situations. The game ended prematurely with all players losing. One of them was one that seemed like it was definitely one player who had kind of duped the rest of the table into believing he would deal with a threat and then chose to not. So, I mean, there's that as an issue. But like I said, it's one of those where I feel like the players in that case should have maybe... I think what happened is the player got upset that the type of music that he had planned his round about had got played early, and so he wasn't able to get any benefit from it, which is, I guess, segues into a new point, which is this playing card system. Like, the actual card playing is tied to different suits, and so imagine this: you can only play one type of music, for the round, but when you go to plan your hand, you kind of like want all of the types of music. In a 4-player game, chances are every one of those types of music should get played. Every player has the option to, and usually playing music is a pretty good thing to do. In a 3-player game, you're going to have one that you kind of plan around not getting played, and I feel like the decisions for that reason, I most enjoyed them in the 3-player game. I wanted this feeling of frantic tension of we're not going to be able to defeat all these monsters that are coming at us. If at any moment there's any weak link in our defense, they're going to bust through and we're going to lose the game. I liked that tension. I liked the need to plan my round, imagining what other players have been like what type of cards have they been getting. Have they been getting this music or this music? Because then I'll plan my entire round, hoping to get the most benefit out of the actions I imagine they're going to take. The big game that this like sort of scratches an itch that very few games that I would say this is very much a modern Euro game, but there's one game that it really does start to get close to that I've not seen any other games really do that well, and that is the Glass Road. Also, it's in the Glass Road, and then the Broom Service, where you have a finite amount of cards, and then you choose a set of them, anticipating other players will sort of help you by playing certain cards, because you only get so many of your own activations, and you want to be able to play when other players go and kind of take away them getting a stronger action and also get to do the action yourself. So it is a very... it's a nice new take on that sort of crafting a hand in advance and planning around what other players are going to do. It's definitely a much friendlier system than both in Glass Road or in Broom Service, because in those games, like, you really want to pick things that nobody else gets. In this game, you're all going to try to be planning around the same music getting played because you want to get the most effectiveness out of your turn. So, all in all, I would call Dwarves Winter a beautiful game full of wonderful plastic miniatures, wonderfully aesthetic, and the actual core Euro game here is extremely solid. You're going to be introducing players to a pool building and then selection mechanic, together with tower defense, and the recipe making in this game with the monsters moving around, like the fact that these monsters each have different effects and require different recipes to beat, and they're going to move around and impact the players that are around them negatively. I think that makes it for a much more interesting go at the recipe filling mechanism, which is basically what this game is, and it adds a big element of logistics. You want to spread your guys out so that you can produce and get as much as possible. Production is tied to how many places you're in, whereas the monster fighting is tied to getting all of your guys in one spot. So you've immediately got this push and pull, tug of war between Do I spread my guys out on the board, or do I stick them all in one spot so I can fight monsters and better fight other things that are going to come at me? And I do think that in general is just a really beautiful, nice core to the system. The card-playing mechanism is a bit uneven for player counts, but I really like how it sings at 3 players and 2 players. It's, in my opinion, the more tension and the not getting to play all of the musical suits is a nice thing that you won't see at the higher player count, at the 4-player count.
It all started when I was first turned into a monster that you'll later on know as the Beast, and this all happened very quickly, and I was in a very different stage in my life, and it was really different times. And so I had a lot of different relationships, and you might notice that my boys here don't look anything like Belle, if you remember from Beauty and the Beast. They're actually from a previous relationship. There were some wild times. It was different times, and, well, let's just say that these are my 2 little bundles of joy as a result.
All of these things together lead me to call Dwarves Winter, and this is going to be a thematic rating. It is a solid 7 out of 10 on the Sallen Coefficient scale. And the reason I say 7 out of 10, and now I specifically want to even give a caveat here. If you kind of bristle at the idea of semi-cooperative play and one player, if you're a very analytical gamer, and one player at the table, you imagine that this is just going to end in a cat's game every time when one player realizes they're behind and then just tanks the game. If you've ever played Vital Lacerda's CO2, that's sort of a tankable game that can happen. If you really do not like the idea of there being cooperation, and if that cooperation fails, there's a good chance you will lose the game together, even though you win alone. If you don't like the idea of that, I would say lower it even to like a 5. But for me specifically, what's going on here is worth working through some of the little, like, kind of, I would say there's a few rough edges here and there, but they're not, to me, it's such a really tight game that the only reason that it even shows is just how tight the entirety of the game is. The fact that the game changes so much between player counts, it almost leads me to want to say, well, if you're going to play this with 4, I really felt some issues with it. But if you want to play this with 3, here's what I would say. So call it like a 7 if you're going to play this game with 3 players. If you're going to play with 4, I liked it slightly less. But my personal rating for Dwarves Winter is actually higher than the Sallen Coefficient of a 7. It's going to be an 8. So I guess maybe call it the Dwarves Dozen plus 1, because to me, this game has got some really interesting ideas that are worth getting through some of the little rougher edges and trying to balance the game for 4 players to a way that I really enjoy. Just for full disclosure, I did help out in a very early prototype developing this game, and from the time that I played it to now, it's a totally different game. It is the ideas that are present here were not ones I suggested. I don't really see. I see so many unique improvements to this game from when I originally had tried it, that I would call this like just a totally different game. I just wanted to say that so that you understand when you see my name there in the rulebook, it was something that I helped a little bit with the development on, but I definitely want to say that Dwarves Winter is worth my time specifically because I think that there is variance here that will calm down any of the complaints that would cause my personal feelings towards this game, which are very, very positive and very solid. I think this is just a great game that I think does something really new, and it does it in a very inviting way. I believe that the issues that I've seen are ones that there is pieces here where you can already sort of make designer-encouraged variants that will work for making that 4-player game tighter, or maybe you like the loose nature of the 4-player game and want to apply that to some of the lower player counts where maybe the game is a little bit more of a volatile game state that players can tank. So overall, these are my thoughts on Dwarves Winter. I hope that you've enjoyed this episode of the Sallen Coefficient. I'm Joe Sallen, and I will catch you on the next video review.
Check out more from Joe right here on the YouTube page for The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly under the playlist, The Sallen Coefficient. Also, find podcast episodes of The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly releasing weekly and tackling topics as well as reviewing and hyping games from many different perspectives. Also, the Longview podcast is hosted by Joe, and it covers one game for 1 to 2 hours. Find those audio programs on iTunes.
And now, hopefully with the new movements that the new strides our society has been making and including and accepting without judgment